Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Open Web Forum created by Fabric Ventures. As someone who has spent more than a respectable amount of time watching TikTok videos, I'm looking forward to our next session. Up next, we have NFTs, decentralized media. What is it? Creators are discovering that they no longer need to be shackled by centralized rent takers, but can instead chart their own path. You might recognize our moderator, Ian, who has been our Open Web MC for the last 2 days. Over to you, Ian.
Cheers, Lotta. So, a quick bit of housekeeping for the viewers. At the top right of your window, somewhere over here, you will see stage. If you want to ask any questions, make sure that's selected first, and then you can pop them in Q&A, and we'll weave them into the conversation as we go. So, as Lotta mentioned today, we'll be talking all about NFTs, what they are, what they can do, and really what they're good for. So we have a couple great panelists. Firstly, Joon Ian Wong, a founder of the non-profit association of cryptocurrency journalists and researchers. He is also a researcher in residence at Rally and has been covering crypto since 2013 at CoinDesk and Quartz. He started the Consensus Conference in 2015 and scaled it in subsequent years to become one of the industry's most important forums. He's an active consultant, advisor, and angel investor to many leading projects in the space. Welcome, Joon.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Joining Joon will be Matt Hussey, the co-founder of Decrypt, a Web3 media company covering the advent of the decentralized web. Prior to that, Matt has been a journalist for 15 years, working across print and digital media, including Wired, The Next Web, and Huffington Post. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks very much for being here.
Cool. So let's start somewhere simple. What is an NFT and what makes it interesting? Joon, why don't you start us off there?
Oh, gosh darn. I got the easy question. Well, I guess, at its core, an NFT is just it's just a kind of file format, right? But the thing that makes it interesting is that it's not fungible, meaning it's unique, it's one of a kind. And that property, I think, of uniqueness means you can use it in all sorts of interesting ways. We've seen people experiment, for example, with ticketing, certificates of authenticity for crypto art and various other types of collectibles, and so on. So it's really that property of uniqueness that makes the NFT format interesting.
Right, so we've got this unique digital asset, something we can actually manipulate in a digitally native way. What are some other things that is being used for, Matt?
Yeah, so the NFTs are, as Joon said, like it's as simple as a piece of code, but that code can be used for lots of different things. It could be used to give someone membership somewhere. It can be used to give someone access. It could be used to give someone a holding in something. It's sort of like a permissioned ticket is a good way of thinking about it. So that could be a permissioned ticket to art, a music event, an event such as this. It could be used as a kind of a marker of learning something or achieving something. So if you think about things like stickers in computer games, for example, could be used, NFTs can be used for that. And then what the fungibility aspect of it makes it interesting is that it becomes a tradable asset. So unlike, if I use the example of the computer game sort of stickers and achievements, they're locked into the game, right? The game's code keeps them within that, and they're essentially invisible outside of that. And what NFTs have done as a kind of core concept, and obviously there are conditions NFTs around what network it's built on and who deploys it, but essentially it allows that kind of piece of code to travel between people and theoretically between networks and all kinds of fun and weird and interesting things.
Cool. You've touched on quite a few different things there, and I'm sure we'll come back to them, learning, achieving, the gamification aspects. But one thing you mentioned at the start was this sort of unlocking content, or otherwise known as gating. And that's something that we've seen in a somewhat adjacent but very related sphere of social tokens, which are fungible. So perhaps, Joon, you can expand a bit on what those are, and perhaps the different reasons that you might use fungible social tokens rather than a non-fungible token, even though it's in often cases very much the same application.
Yeah, absolutely. Social tokens is something, it's sort of a corner of crypto that is, I think, gaining traction quickly, but it's not as visible or well known as, use cases like NFTs for crypto art. So I guess first of all, what are social tokens? So unlike NFTs, which are non-fungible, meaning they can't be replaced like for like, social tokens tend to be fungible tokens, meaning there's a supply of them, and that supply is controlled by various factors that might be familiar to people from sort of well-known token projects, right? So social tokens usually will have their own sort of supply schedule, emission, and so on and so forth. So you can think of them almost as just like a really tiny microcap ERC20 token. Now, what makes them interesting is usually the way that they're distributed, right? So, for example, this whole notion of community is very baked into this notion of the value that's backing social tokens. One project that I really like that I've been a part of and watch evolve is a community called FWB, Friends with Benefits, right? So they issued a social token, ERC20 token. You buy that token, and if you hold a certain balance of those tokens, you can then access various things. The main thing is a FWB Discord server. And within that Discord server, if you hold different balances, you can access different channels, such as a community selected Substack subscriptions channel, various other channels that carry added value. And so it's this whole idea of holding a balance of this social token, the FWB token, which then unlocks certain experiences or access or products and services. The last thing I'll say about FWB is, they recently crossed over in a hybrid way to the real world, right? So they held a party in Miami around the Bitcoin Miami conference a couple of weeks ago. The party was called All Time High, which I thought was just brilliant. And to get into the party, you had to show your wallet, your MetaMask or whatever wallet, and it had to carry a certain amount of FWB tokens, right? So apparently people were desperately opening MetaMask and trading on Uniswap to try and buy enough tokens to get into the party, which is just, kind of the most hilariously nerdy, geeky, and fun, sort of interesting thing you can kind of imagine. So that's social tokens, and the main platforms include things like Rally, where I'm an advisor, and Research in Residence, Roll, and several others that are coming up.
Yeah, I love that community FWB. I actually joined relatively recently, trying to scoop up a few cheaper ones, because for a while it was a pretty high barrier to entry, and that's something that is true in some ways for both social tokens and NFTs. You have this constant sort of financial comparison, and people are always thinking of them as a financial asset rather than just art or just sort of a social token, right? So where do you think, if we take that example of FWB, where do you think the value in it accrues? Like, how do you separate the value from the services it might provide you versus actually the social clout or sort of just the speculative nature as many crypto assets have? If Joon, you could, or
shall I go again? I'll do a quick one. So I think that is exactly the tension that's inherent in these sort of tokenized relationships, right? And basically nobody has solved it, because if we did, we would all just use that model. But I suspect that you're starting to see this type of financialization creep in to other types of fan or creator relationships anyway, right? So if you look at the success of OnlyFans, for example, that's like a platform that is super popular for creators of all kinds, but every interaction practically costs money, right? If you want to send a DM, you want them to reply to you, unlock certain media, and so on. I think you also see that in other domains, like, for example, there's some fascinating research out there on football club shares, right? The shares of football clubs. And economists have found, for example, that in the past, at least, football club shares were more thinly traded than the wider index, right? Meaning, if you held shares of Manchester United and so on, there's less trading volume every day. And that's because those holders are fans. And so they're not going to be trading the shares, based on a 1-0 loss to Man City or something. They're going to hold it for ages, which then ends up in a dynamic where those fans get dumped on by hedge funds and other people who do trade those shares and treat them as financial instruments. So I think, in a way, it's the same problems which remain unresolved, but now now introduced the long tail, right? Now every community kind of has these dynamics to deal with.
Yeah, I don't want to dive too much or jump too much into a rabbit hole here, but just pressing on, sort of double clicking on that point, there is something of a trend among younger generations to grow up investing. We have apps like Robinhood, where it's so easy now, KYC in 5 minutes, and then boom, you can spend money on all of these assets. So sort of pressing more on those risks of having these financial relationships, what do you think we can do better to probably inform younger people about how to invest, how to do it safely, not getting too much leverage or having too much risk and managing those things, Matt?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think it kind of builds on what Joon was saying. So what crypto is really good at doing is building tools and then releasing them into community and go do something with them, and then learning to see what the community has done with them and then iterating on that. So while you do have people who collect tokens because they are fans of the project, they want the project to succeed, you will inevitably have other people who are speculators, right? And I think crypto's ideological response to that rather is if that's what the community wants, that's what the community wants. I think the challenge with as you mentioned, young people see opportunities to take part in a financial system that has historically kept them out for good reason. Now saying, I want to be part of this too, and I want to either shape projects or I want to be able to hold value in projects that I believe in. And then if I want to exit those projects and to make profit, then I should be allowed to, right? I think educating people on that starts with the basics of any investing advice. Only put in what you're willing to lose. And then kind of what crypto does really well is it turns investors into evangelizers, right? So whereas to use Joon's Man United example, hedge funds probably aren't fans of Manchester United, whereas the fans aren't hedge funds necessarily. So it creates a kind of division between holders, right? Whereas in this crypto space, they're all jumbled together and mixed together. And I think if you buy into a project in crypto, there's more of an assumption that you are a believer in it, especially around social tokens, especially around NFTs. Obviously, we're in a speculative mania at the moment with this technology because people have found it and realized that there is value to be made. But I think in terms of educating people, I think it's more about less top down and more if you believe in a project, if you hold value in a project, if you hold tokens or NFTs in the project, that's kind of the point, right? It's ownership, isn't it? It's fractional ownership is really what this technology is trying to offer people, rather than it's just a speculative way to make money. And I think that's the education is the evolution of the technology, rather than, by the way, there are some people out there who use this technology to speculate on the value of a project, and that may force the value up and it may force the value down. I think that will even out over time. But I think for people who are into crypto, especially young people, the offer I think it gives to them is you can take part in a system that has for hundreds of years kept you out.
Amazing. Yeah, really, really good summary. Sort of bringing it back to what the topic of this panel was originally meant to be on NFTs and sort of taking that line of creators and how they can be empowered by these new tools, and along that line of sort of taking a business stance, monetizing their top fans. And this is really about creating that relationship between the creators and the fans, just as football clubs like Manchester United create a relationship with their fans through a social token. Joon, what do you think some of the best ways that you've seen creators manage to build that relationship through the new tools that we have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very much a work in progress. And so I think you have a spectrum, right? So I think you have things like Friends with Benefits, they issued a token with Roll originally. That requires it's much more DIY, right? They're building a lot of the tools and conventions themselves. For example, they have a notion of seasons, which is, it's a kind of demurrage almost, or kind of inflation that they introduced to the system, where every season you need to hold a higher balance of tokens in order to stay in the Discord server, right? Because one of the big problems with social tokens is velocity of money. So if everyone is just holding the tokens to access stuff, no one ever trades them and spends them, and then you get a very sluggish economy. Which is actually more open to speculative sort of frenzy. So I think on one hand, you have things like that are much more experimental. And then you have systems like Rally, for example, that take a lot of that legwork away from the issuer, right, from the creator. So on Rally, we have people ranging from, people who do marketing, to historians, to game streamers, to bands like Portugal the Man. All of those people, they can issue a token based on the same rules and the same infrastructure as every other creator on that platform. So that takes a lot of legwork out. Of course, the downside is you can't customize, you can't experiment as much as if you were just using a mainnet Ethereum token. The upside is, for example, in the Rally case, they have a sidechain architecture, so there's hardly any gas to pay. You get rid of a lot of the macro sort of Ethereum mainnet problems that come with operating, in crypto. So I think those are the two ends of the spectrum. It sort of is still really working itself out, I think.
Do you have anything to add to that, Matt?
Yeah, I think so what we've seen in Decrypt, and where Decrypt sort of become a kind of a helping hand for legacy companies, is they look at this space and go, what do I do, right? And I think the approach that we've taken at Decrypt, and we've done experiments with NFTs as a form of community building, is like, how do you find your most loyal fans, and how do you retain them, right? I think that's the kind of the promise of a lot of this technology, is that for media companies especially, is like, how do you seek out, reward, speak to those fans, and then those fans feel like enfranchised enough to be able to have a say in the future of the project. What we're finding with legacy media companies is, like, they will come to us and go, hey, we've got like this amazing archive of material that we earn all the copyright for. Can we NFT it, right? Because people are going, oh, is this a revenue model here? And the initial answer is yes, but the sort of follow-up question is, to what end, right? Because if you NFT all your stuff and you sell all your stuff, then are you not selling the brand with it? Because the nature of crypto blockchain, it's open source, right? So once you've sold the NFT, the ownership is gone. So what we're trying to sort of, I guess, teach media legacy companies is saying, like, yeah, you can have like a wealth generating event with an NFT, but think about what the bigger picture is. And what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to increase the value of your audience and seek out your most valuable users? Are you sick and tired of giving Facebook and Google 95% of the ad revenue market, and you're looking to try and wrest some of that away? Are you looking to basically pay for archive management, because looking after images and videos on physical mediums is expensive? And to sort of think more about the technology as just a stepping stone to something else, rather than the end goal itself. Like, obviously lots of artists are bringing their archives onto NFTs because they're sat in a warehouse somewhere not doing anything. But I think the real question is, what, as a media company, are you trying to do? Are you trying to just generate money, or are you trying to do something? What Decrypt's trying to do is find your biggest fans, reward them, enfranchise them to have a say in the business, and then give them frequent opportunities for them to do that. Because then, from a sort of advertising perspective, or our commercial partner perspective, those people become incredibly valuable, and those people you can't find using traditional kind of ad targeting, because that's not how those systems are built, right? Those systems are built on scraping data points, collecting like semi-anonymous data on who you are, basic demographic data, but it doesn't tell you much about the kind of incentive and the kind of meaning of the brand for that individual. Whereas what this technology theoretically can is because you keep them you give them an ecosystem where they play in, they have ownership of, and they have a say in where it goes.
Exactly, and that's actually where all of this sort of rolls up into the much larger movement of the open web, where we are owning our data and we're moving away from this Web 2 legacy ad tech model. And Seven gave a wonderful speech this morning on that, and how we can still share data, but it shouldn't just be commercialized necessarily for a few tech giants. And you mentioned rights there, and we've had a question from Michael on that, and rights is a very broad topic and actually being explored in so many different avenues. But more specifically on copyright, what do you think, who do you think should be owning the copyrights for these NFTs? Are they actually going to be imbued into the NFT, or is the NFT sort of adjacent from the legal framework in the real world? Joon, maybe you can take that.
I actually don't know. I'm not up to speed on the state of that, but my basic understanding is that the NFT does not carry with it, any ironclad rights. All of that sort of has to be agreed, sort of off chain, which is you still have to hire lawyers and get a contract and sign it with ink and so on. But I would love to hear from Matt or yourself, Ian, if you know what the situation is with the legal rights.
Yeah, I could speak to that. I gave a talk to a room full of lawyers on this very subject. So from a legal perspective, we're in kind of a grey area at the moment because technology is so new. Legislation hasn't really caught up with this technology, and it's the same thing with what happened with the ICO movement in crypto a few years ago, where the technology moved so fast, but regulation took a time to catch up and to basically go, hang on a minute, you can't actually sell a security without prior authorization kind of thing. So crypto has always been very good at moving very quickly. Where we are with NFTs at the moment is there isn't, as Joon said, there isn't a real legal basis, a defendable legal basis for NFT creation at the moment. Obviously that varies from region to region depending on their copyright laws, right? And so crypto's kind of great challenge is when it bumps into the real world. So when it bumps into regulation, when it bumps into state laws, when it bumps into in America, the federal state system where laws change from state to state, right? Especially around copyright and ownership of stuff. So what we're going to start to see more and more over the next kind of year or so, we'll start to see legal cases that are trying to clarify this, because what's going to start happening, you'll see every week someone has NFT'd something, and the rights over who owns it is questionable. So we've been speaking to artists saying what's stopping somebody going on Google image search, pulling off a high-res vision image of my art and NFTing it? And we said nothing at the moment, because there's no regulation around stopping it, because that's what the internet has always struggled with, is the infinite replication of work. Where we're going to start to see trouble happening is when people go and ask lawyers to go and pursue these people for copyright infringement. And that's when you'll start to see regulation appear. It's going to be really difficult because, like all copyright law, it depends where the person is based. So if you remember back to the Napster days, when MP3s were being copied, you had a huge spring up of companies basing themselves in Russia that had really relaxed copyright laws. And then the copyright lawyers go, well, we can't really pursue them because they're in a different territory to where the filement's based. So we're in that phase. We're in kind of the kind of mania of early noughties kind of internet age, where this stuff is still being worked out.
So what you're telling me is I still have to hire lawyers. Fix all that with smart contracts.
Yeah. Smart contracts are misleading in the sense that people think they are legally binding. It's just code. It's just code that prescribes the conditions by which something should exist and move. And in that code, you can write anything you want. So you can write things like, I want perpetual royalties on all the NFTs I sell. So if I'm an artist, I can write into the code and says, I sell this NFT today, I take the full value of it, If that then resells on a secondary market to somebody else, the code says I will claim 10% of that resale value in perpetuity, kind of thing. So like, this is what's exciting about NFTs, is the code is as flexible as the creators want it to be, but who has to understand that like that doesn't mean that you have a legal title to the thing you created necessarily.
Yeah, I do want to touch on that very quickly, because we could probably spend hours talking about perpetual royalties, but a lot of creators, as you say, have been seduced by this promise of, you know, sell it once and you'll get 10%, 20%, you know, perpetuity. But actually there's a lot of conflicting opinions on how viable that is. There's been some proposals for new NFT standards, there's some for fixed royalties, so that anytime it exchanges wallets, you know, there's a fixed fee, but that's not quite as exciting as the percentage that really sort of drives the numbers up, or just sort of more simple marketplace standards. So for centralized NFT marketplaces, we all agree we're going to adhere to the same royalty standard. One argument that I've seen is that you could just wrap the NFT and then sell that wrapped NFT, and you sort of lose the data that the underlying NFT has been sold for. But just what are your thoughts more broadly, Joon, on, you know, is this something that will really materialize? Should we be bringing all these people into the space on, look, you're going to be rich selling, you know, getting perpetual royalties?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're gonna see these waves of sort of centralization and decentralization in things like the crypto art and collectibles market, right? Because I think what you see now is, you know, the marketplaces have a lot of pricing power, so you know they basically can decide whether to adopt some of these royalty standards or not, whether to interoperate with other marketplaces and so on. And so, you know, we're in quite a centralized phase in a way now, even though we have a number of big marketplaces that are competing. And then I think you might end up in a decentralizing phase where, you know, someone comes up with a new EIP, where there's a new, I know several teams working on proposing new NFT standards, which will bake in some of these interoperable components. So I think, you know, as we've seen with Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc., I think you'll see waves of this come and go. And I think so far we've netted out more decentralized. That could just be my anchoring bias, but you know, I think we end up this idea of progressive decentralization, I think, might still hold true.
Yeah, just to add to that, so like we work with a project called Uler or Uler if you pronounce the name correctly. And what they've come up with is a really interesting model around the NFT production space. So they've kind of mimicked the art world by doing original NFTs and print NFTs. And then what they've done around that is, so if you're an original holder of an NFT, and in the case of Uler, it's a piece of algorithmically generated music that is unique to the NFT. If you're the original holder and someone wants to buy a print, there is a yield curve attached to the printing of that NFT. So if you think about in traditional art worlds, so if you've got a picture of like a Van Gogh painting, there are so many prints that the valuation of the prints has sort of been driven down in price. The original is obviously still very expensive, but the value in that is contained within the original. What they've been working on is, if you're the original holder, the more popular the print your original is, the higher the yield on the minting of the print. So you're starting to get, and then what's happening is then the holders in those communities. So if you're an original holder, they're starting to offer incentives for people to buy prints by offering them a slice of the yield that they get off the printing. There's now people doing remixes of the original NFT. So you're starting to get this like really wonderful like flourishing around like the technology. And I think the best thing that crypto does is build tools, release them, and then see what people build with them. So like NFT technology is multiple years old. It's only really in the last sort of 8 to 10 months that people have really seen what it can and can't do. And to Joon's point, that new proposals are being made all the time. There are like lots of things are like slated to be discussed and debated by the Ethereum core team around like new ways of doing this. But you can already see like on the fringes of this technology, people are working on some really interesting ways of creating value that isn't as like, as you said, like as almost restrictive or draconian as like fixed rights in the contract, but a kind of more flexible, yield curve whereby if you hold something popular, you can make money out of it. If you don't, then it's on you to try and make it more appealing to others to join or to take part in it.
Yeah, so as you both mentioned, we have new standards, constant innovation happening. I mean, right now, most NFTs are pretty simple and static. I think you can say you have this token, it tells you the current owner, some history of transactions and previous owners. It might point you towards some media, a JPEG file, whatever it is. And then maybe there's also some metadata if it gets used in a card game and has some stats. So I know there's lots of projects like NFT42 on Ethereum, like Remark on Kusama, all the different ecosystems have their own teams working on it. But what do you think are some of the new functionalities? We mentioned wrapping within another NFT, or you can have sort of yield-bearing assets, streaming, funds to the owner of an NFT. What are some of the most exciting new functionalities coming out, Joon?
Yeah, this whole trend of utility NFTs, I think, is something I've been tracking a little bit. I think one of the most interesting teams I've seen working on this is the folks at Unlock Protocol. So they've been around for a few years. The way that works is by holding an NFT in your wallet, you can unlock some paywalled content on a website, right? And now that seems like a simple idea, but then they've been making it easier and easier for publishers to drop those locks on more and more granular pieces of content. So you could lock an entire section for members only. You could lock a paragraph of a story, right? Or a photo. And so if you start thinking about composing these locks, you start having an interesting kind of portfolio of things that you can lock and unlock. And now if you think about extending it beyond one publisher, right? So let's say, there was a, let's pick a newspaper, a Financial Times reader, right? Let's say they were locking some content with this. Now, other people on the internet could see that, oh, these 2 million people unlock NFTs, right? So unlock various types of FT content. We can actually pseudonymously send them things which they can then opt into. So we could airdrop, the FT how to spend it NFT holder. We could airdrop them, an NFT of a great upcoming, Art Sotheby's art auction, or some fine wine thing, etc. So you can do this kind of quite interesting, I think, opt-in type of. It's almost like a reverse cookies, right? It's like opt-in cookies for people, which I think kind of flips the whole, ad tech model on its head, and actually lets people opt in and hold things as bearer instruments in a much more kind of quite very simple and like elegant and effective way, I think.
Yeah, love what Unlock are doing. Matt, have you come across anything else that you're particularly excited by?
Yeah, so I've kind of fallen in love with like gamified NFTs. So a great example is a project called Zrun, and it's just gone after like the horse racing industry and NFT'd it, right? So what they do is they have like horses that they could generate NFT, and they're kind of like, and they have just like real horses, they have like genesis and strains of horse. So like if it's a champion horse, and you have an offspring of the champion, it retains some of the assets. So, so what's happening there is like if you hold a horse NFT, you can race it, and then you can take part in virtual races, and then you can win stuff off it. What's happening already is you're getting people creating DAOs who then buy up horses, like championship horses, and create stables. And then they can invite people to take part in the stable, and then get a share of the yield of the horse racing and stuff. So you're starting to see like basically anything that's happening in the real world, like in that sort of ownership, fractional ownership, gaming stuff. You're starting to see companies build really interesting ways of going. You'll never own a real horse because they're too expensive and no one has a stable, but you can take part in the kind of thrilling sense of this kind of like real/not real game whereby your horse and its attributes will race against 7 other horses and their attributes, and then you can start to breed the horses together to create new NFTs that then have different attributes. So you're taking all these sort of things that happen in the real world almost and have happened for hundreds of years, but the NFT technology allows people to take part, to own, to basically it lowers the barrier of entry into what is, again, another quite elitist industry and makes it available and accessible to everybody.
I love that. Just as DeFi is democratizing access to, the best financial products, we have everything else in the world being democratized by NFTs, and then the intersection with DeFi, and it's all wrapping together. Cool. So that's some sort of projects working on NFTs now. Another evolution of NFTs that I'm quite interested in right now are dynamic NFTs. So as oracles get cheaper and have a sort of higher wealth of data, we're able to programmatically encode NFTs to change over time. So at some event that happens, perhaps a sports game, once that finishes and there's some score, your card changes. Have you come across dynamic NFTs, or are there any particular cool use cases that you come across? Because it's really just like a wide open space right now. Joon, perhaps you can start.
Yeah, I might be a bit behind the curve on this. I mean, I've read about a few, right? I think BT, the electronic music producer, has a big dynamic NFT project. It's like a 24-hour NFT and so on. But I haven't, personally interacted with any. And part of the reason is this space moves so quickly. I'm actually starting a podcast and newsletter just to cover all of the different developments in crypto and media. So if you go to my Twitter, Joon Ian at Twitter, you can sign up for the newsletter there. It's funded by the Edgeware DAO. So it's going to be a media podcast funded by a DAO that funds lots of media things. So hopefully I'll learn more about dynamic NFTs that way.
Well, Matt, do you know about them?
Yeah. I've been diving into this space quite a lot because Decrypt's creating its own NFTs, so we've been exploring the technology quite a lot. One of my favorite projects is a company called Async Art, and basically they are a kind of programmable NFT kind of platform that allows artists to essentially create layers for an piece of art, right? So if let's say you have a picture of a bridge over a river with grass on the side, sky, and then sun, you can separate all of those out into separate layers and allow ownership to be divided amongst different people. Once you've done that, what they do there is, then they have layer states. So let's say like the sun, you own the sun layer, and you can have a state change. You change it to the moon, or you can change it to a crescent moon, or you can change it to a sunset. And only the owner can do that. So what happens is like these NFTs, these art NFTs, they have an app where you can stick it on like Apple TV or any other kind of like readable like digital media art thing, and you may go to bed with the picture being a certain way, but if the owners of the slices change it the next day, the NFT will be different. So it allows this sort of, and they've got one which is a poker game, so the layers are players, dealers, the cards on the table, the chips that you're gambling, all this kind of stuff. So, and I've watched people buy into the NFT and play each other at poker on the NFT, which is then sat in a digital picture frame somewhere else, and it's constantly changing because people are constantly changing the layer states. So it's something that it's quite, the technical implementation is still quite high, but the opportunity there for for artists to be creative, for owners of art to be creative, to feel closer to the people who make the things is huge. And I think we're just at the beginning of what that can do. Like I've seen NFTs that can ingest like APIs, so they can ingest like a weather API, so the weather changes in the picture depending on what the weather is set to mimic. I've seen stuff that that tracks like Bitcoin's price, that decays or grows over time depending on what the price is doing. So the state change happens that way. And again, this is still really early stages, but people are playing around with it and doing really fun stuff. So like the oracle, to your point about oracles, you can pull oracles if you want, or you can just pull standard APIs. Like you can pull Twitter feeds and like there's a great API, open API that tracks like how are people feeling on Twitter, and it scrapes emotional language and then creates a kind of snapshot each day of like how are people in California feeling that day, and then you can ingest that into a NFT piece of art, and the art will change about how Twitter's feeling that day. So like, yeah, there's lots of fun things.
Amazing. I mean, it's just stuff that wasn't possible before. Could you imagine having a painting, an actual painting in your house that's changing every 5 minutes? We're actually, unfortunately, running out of time. So there was a few other questions I want to get to, but very well. In 30 seconds, what's a prediction for the next 12 months? Joon, go.
I think more and more creators of all types will unlock the values of their communities through social tokens and NFTs.
Amazing. And Matt?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a bit of a dumping out of a lot of like the mania in the marketplace. And I think you're going to start to see more like legacy companies move into the space to start to use it, to try and play around with it, figure it out. And hopefully my hope is to use the technology as a kind of community tool rather than just a pure speculative tool.
That's a very, very beautiful future I think we can look forward to. Thank you so much both. This has been an absolute blast. Hopefully we can do it again sometime. We'll continue on Twitter. But yeah, thank you again, Joon and Matt.
Thank you, Matt. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Matt, Joon, and Ian. That was really a fascinating discussion, and a real shame that we had to wrap up just then. It's definitely going to be an interesting space to watch as creators manage their relationships with the super fans, the speculators, on top of all the evolving use cases of NFTs. So thank you so much for that.
Cheers. See you later.
See ya. So this is a great opportunity to announce that Star Atlas, one of the partners for the Open Web Forum, is hosting their Neil Armstrong NFT art sale, which is looking hot. So check out their Twitter, @StarAtlas. Now it's time for our lunch break. So if you're in London, enjoy the hot weather and stretch your legs. I'll see you back at 2 p.m. BST for venture investing in the open economy. This is the Open Web Forum created by Fabric Ventures, and be sure to check out our Twitter @Fabric_VC.